Hey everybody, Jonas Callis here of the Hurt at Work Workers' Compensation Law Firm. Many of you know me as the Workers' Comp Guy. First, the obligatory disclaimer. The following information is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice to anyone, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship with anyone. If you've been to our website or seen our other YouTube videos, you know that most work injuries in Virginia come from a specific identifiable accident that occurs in a reasonably defined moment in time, okay? But you're also aware that some compensable Virginia work accidents are actually work illnesses or diseases come from a work-related prolonged exposure to some sort of chemical or toxin or irritant, right? And so those are called occupational diseases, and those are also compensable. In other words, workers do not have to be injured in just some specific accident to get workers' comp benefits. They can also get these benefits if they develop a work-related disease or illness. Now today, we're going to discuss a specific occupational disease that occurs with some frequency, particularly in like the southwest region of Virginia, where there are coal mines and coal miners. And that is coal workers' pneumoconiosis, also known as black lung disease. Pursuant to sections 65.2-504, 65.2-513, and 65.2-514, and other sections of the code as well in case law, coal workers suffering from work-related coal workers' pneumoconiosis or black lung disease may receive the same benefits. So, lifetime medical award, temporary total disability benefits, temporary partial disability benefits, permanent partial disability benefits, permanent total disability benefits, vocational rehabilitation, et cetera, possible full and final settlement. They can receive basically the same benefits that other injured Virginia workers can receive for their work injuries. Although in the coal workers' pneumoconiosis claims, there are a few twists with regard to permanent partial disability benefits and permanent total disability benefits. But essentially the same benefits are available, all right? But let's back up a little bit. Let's start with kind of what is black lung disease? Like we said, it's an occupational disease caused by exposure to coal dust or graphite. It's a serious lung disease that causes permanent damage, affecting both respiratory function or your lungs and cardiovascular function or your heart. It can be fatal. Most cases appear in coal miners who have dedicated their lives to working, to extracting coal. Obviously, as everyone knows, a lot of that is underground work, right? The coal extraction. However, exposure can also happen not underground, right? It can happen above ground where coal is being processed after it's gotten from underground, but also when there's strip mining, right, which is above the ground. There can be significant enough exposure during strip mining to cause coal workers' pneumoconiosis. Essentially what happens is in the course of their work, miners inhale silica dust. And let me just say, it's not necessarily limited to coal. You don't have to be a coal miner to have developed work-related coal workers' pneumoconiosis. That's just the name of the disease, right? As we discussed, it's also known as black lung disease. So if you develop if it's easier for you to think about, instead of calling it coal workers' pneumoconiosis, just think of it this way. If you developed from being a construction worker, for example, work-related black lung disease, right? You would also qualify for Virginia workers' compensation benefits, okay? So, but what happens is, once the miners or other workers inhale the silica dust, the body has it's unable to expel the silica dust from the lungs. And over the course of time, the silica dust particles, they block the airways and they cause permanent scarring, which leads to chronic inflammation in the lungs, an excess buildup of protective tissue in the lungs, which is actually called fibrosis, and cell death, which is necrosis. So obviously these are, if you don't know anything about medical terminology, and I don't know a whole lot, but obviously these things sound bad, and they are. So that's just, I don't want to get into it too much. That's just a kind of an overview of what it is. Now, what types of black lung disease are we talking about, at least when it comes to Virginia workers' compensation laws? There are two types of co-workers pneumoconiosis. And I don't think it's really limited to Virginia law. I think it's kind of looked at that way in federal law, and I think in the medical community as well. But there are two types of black lung disease. One is simple co-workers pneumoconiosis, and the other is complex pneumoconiosis. Okay, and the complex pneumoconiosis is sometimes called progressive massive fibrosis. And we just talked about the fibrosis, which is, again, the buildup of protective tissue in the lungs. So most co-workers who have been diagnosed with black lung disease have simple co-workers pneumoconiosis. It's the most common one. And common symptoms, it really is, the common symptoms are coughing, sometimes with black sputum. The black sputum is more of an indicator than just the coughing. Shortness of breath, chest tightness. But when someone who's been working in the mines for 30 years comes to a doctor with coughing, shortness of breath, and chest tightness, the doctor may suspect black lung, right? Especially if the sputum is black. If I go to the doctor with coughing, shortness of breath, and chest tightness, the healthcare provider may not suspect that, right? So sometimes it's a little bit of troubleshooting. So that's simple co-workers pneumoconiosis. A small percentage of coal miners and other workers, but mostly miners, develop progressive massive fibrosis, which is the more serious form. With progressive massive fibrosis, large scars develop in the lungs. The scarring often destroys lung tissue and blood vessels, and it causes significant functional impairment. Okay, and when I say significant functional impairments, I'm thinking of the case of a client I had one time who couldn't, had a difficult time walking from his house to his mailbox to check his mail. He had to have his oxygen tank with him, and even then, it was most of the time he didn't do it because it was too exhausting. So it's serious stuff. So how is black lung disease diagnosed and treated? Now that you know what it is, an initial diagnosis is usually made when the miner or other worker presents with the symptoms that we just talked about. A chest x-ray or CT, a computed tomography scan, will be performed. And what they're looking for is inflammation or other spots in the lungs, right? So they're looking for, they're also called abnormalities or opacities, right? And what the healthcare providers will do, especially x-ray readers, they will attempt to determine, based on the frequency and the size of the opacities, right, or abnormalities that they see on the x-ray, they'll attempt to kind of characterize what kind of co-workers pneumoconiosis it is, how far along it is, how bad it is. Once they actually diagnose co-workers pneumoconiosis, they may order, so that's the diagnosis, that's kind of, well, here's what I think you have, right? Another way to further build upon, well, how bad is it? Like, how bad is it affecting you, though, right? Because sometimes it happens where somebody will have co-workers. I mean, medical stuff can be weird sometimes, right? I've seen cases where someone, a lot of times if somebody has just the beginning maybe of co-workers pneumoconiosis, they may not even show any symptoms, right? But I've seen cases where someone would appear to have significant co-workers pneumoconiosis from the x-rays, but functionally it's like it doesn't even affect them, right? So it's a long way of getting to my next point. Is what the doctors will do is after they've kind of diagnosed black lung disease, they may run some additional tests like a pulmonary function test or arterial blood gas study, just to kind of determine how well your lungs are transferring the oxygen that you inhale to your blood, and that's getting to your other tissues, right? So really they're testing your functionality, right? How bad is the black lung affecting you? So that's that part, right? Now, what's the treatment? What's the treatment for black lung disease? It's incurable. Right? We don't have a cure. There's no magic pill or anything like that. Treatments have been developed that can lessen the symptoms or attempt to lessen the symptoms, and to attempt to improve the co-workers or the workers, the afflicted person's quality of life. Depending on the severity of the co-workers' pneumoconiosis, though, the workers, people afflicted with black lung disease may be prescribed inhalers, nebulizers, an oxygen tank, or some other forms of pulmonary rehabilitation. Of course, sometimes co-workers also smoke, and so part of the remedy is to quit smoking as well, and the doctors will strongly recommend that because that obviously helps. So what benefits are available? We've touched on this, right? Basically the same ones that are available to any other injured Virginia worker, right? But again, there are some twists, right? So pursuant to section 65.2-504 of the Code of Virginia, and we're talking about permanent partial disability benefits now, those permanent partial disability benefits may be available for different stages, what are called stages of the disease. And stages just refer to the varying degrees of severity of the disease that exists based on the Commission's review of the medical records as a whole. Okay, for first stage co-workers pneumoconiosis, minors entitled to 50 weeks of benefits, regardless of the minor's ability to work at the time. For second stage pneumoconiosis, minor is entitled to 100 weeks of benefits, regardless of the ability to work. And here's the worst one. The third stage of co-workers pneumoconiosis, the minor is entitled to 300 weeks of benefits if, number one, the disease is found to be in the third stage involving progressive massive fibrosis or involving x-ray readings depicting category A, B, or C large opacities, right? So instead of a bunch of small ones, right, at some point the small ones may kind of join together, right, and form a large opacity, okay? So it's that, number one. And number two, the minor does not apparently suffer from any impairment to his or her ability to work at that time. So even if there's no impairment to functionality, if you have progressive massive fibrosis or large opacities, right, the worker can still receive 300 weeks for third stage pneumoconiosis. In addition, all right, so that's permanent partial disability benefits. In addition to kind of the quirky way that the PPD benefits are done with black lung, permanent total disability also has kind of its own criteria under Virginia law. So obviously, if we're talking about permanent and total disability, we're talking about severe situations, right? So first, where the disease is medically determined to be a category A for one or more large opacities whose combined longest dimension does not exceed about 50 millimeters. Category B, for one or more large opacities whose combined longest dimension exceeds 50 millimeters but does not exceed the equivalent area of the right upper lung zone. Or category C opacity, for one or more large opacities whose combined longest dimension exceed the equivalent area of the right upper lung zone. So that's the first situation. The second situation, where the minor's condition has deteriorated to progressive massive fibrosis. Or the third condition, where the minor suffers from any stage of co-workers pneumoconiosis, which is accompanied by sufficient pulmonary function loss, right? That's the functionality, how much blood is being transferred from the lungs to the blood and the rest of the body, so that it renders the worker totally unable to perform manual labor in the duty environment. The minor has been instructed not to work in any mine or other environment, and the worker has been unable to secure any other employment. So, in those circumstances, usually a minor, but any worker really, if they happen to somehow be diagnosed with these severe conditions, would be entitled to permanent total disability benefits. And if you've read our website, or if you've seen our other videos, or if maybe you just know because you've done some research on your own, typically the Workers' Compensation Commission limits disability payments to 500 weeks. Well, if you qualify for permanent total disability, like in those 3 severe instances of coworkers' pneumoconiosis, the 500-week limit is gone. There is no 500-week limit. So any such worker would be able to collect a weekly disability check for the remainder of her or his life. Okay. So how does a worker get these benefits, right? Workers can file claims for black lung disease workers' comp benefits under state law, and obviously I'm discussing Virginia state law, but also under federal law, because there's a federal Black Lung Benefits Act. So there are 2 different paths to recover black lung benefits, or potential paths, I should say. For Virginia claims, when a coal miner or other worker is diagnosed with work-related black lung disease, including black lung disease, silicosis, pneumoconiosis, rock dust on the lungs, because sometimes doctors in more rural areas will use terminology that's used more in the rural areas that people are familiar with, right? So they may just call it dust on the lungs or something, kind of unofficially, just talking to the workers, right? Or other terms of similar meaning to those. The miner or the worker may have a viable workers' compensation claim for the benefits we've talked about. I'm still talking about Virginia law. But as with any other workers' comp benefit, okay, a state claim can be waived, right? We've talked about statute of limitations in other videos on our website, right? So a Virginia state claim for black lung disease benefits may be waived or lost if the claim is not timely filed with the Workers' Compensation Commission. Now, I'm not talking about with the employer or with the Workers' Compensation Insurance Company. I'm talking about with the actual Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission, okay? So when will it be waived? Or another way to think about that is, what are the important deadlines that you can't miss, right? So first of all, a miner or other worker recently diagnosed with work-related coworkers' pneumoconiosis must give notice to her or his employer within 60 days of receiving the diagnosis. 60 days. That's just the first step. Typically, employers are required by statute to give it's like a little paragraph kind of recital notice to the employee once the employee has told them they've been diagnosed with coworkers' pneumoconiosis that's related to their coal mining work, for example, let's say. The employer is supposed to give this little notice thing to the employee, okay? So what does the worker have to do then, right? In addition to the requirement that they report it within 60 days, miners or other workers afflicted with work-related coworkers' pneumoconiosis or black lung disease must also file a claim with the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission within 3 years of the date that the diagnosis of the disease was first communicated to that employee, okay? Or I guess the legal representative of the estate. Or within 5 years from the date of the last injurious exposure at work, right, in employment, the last exposure at work, whichever first occurs, okay? And if you want to look at that for yourself, that's Virginia Code Section 65.2-406, all right? Now, one thing I want to tell you, and it usually doesn't come up, because employers have, I guess their HR departments or whatever, they're typically pretty good about giving the notice out, the statutory notice, the paragraph that I told you about. But if they don't, if the employer forgets, once the employee says, hey, within 60 days, right, hey, I've been diagnosed with coworkers' pneumoconiosis, the doctor says it's related to my work as a coal miner. If the employer forgets to give that notice, just it slips between the cracks, whatever, if they forget to give that statutory notice that they're supposed to give to the employee, right, the 3-year statute of limitations does not run. It doesn't begin running, right? So you technically would have more than 3 years, I guess, depending on when or if they ever gave the employee that notice, okay? But like I said, it's pretty rare. But you should know about it just in case. Now, that's really the state claim. That's all there is to it in terms of filing deadlines, important timing deadlines. With federal claim for black lung disease, it's a little different. When you're when you would be entitled to federal black lung benefits. Workers who have developed black lung disease, like we said, can also have a claim for disability benefits under the federal Black Lung Benefits Act. Under federal law, though, a worker can receive monetary payments and medical benefits for black lung disease if she or he is totally disabled by the condition. You have to be totally disabled, right? What does that mean? It means the disease keeps them from performing the type of work that requires skills similar to those they used to work in their previous mining job, right? So you really have to be totally disabled, which that's not necessarily the case if you remember in under Virginia state law, okay? So similar to Virginia law, surviving spouses and children of minors who died from black lung disease may also be entitled to monthly monetary benefits under federal law. That's, in case you're interested in looking it up, 30 USC, that's United States Code, sections 901 and 902. But if a minor or a surviving spouse is also receiving workers' compensation or other disability payments under state law, and they start receiving under federal law, the monthly benefits from the federal black lung program may be reduced, to kind of offset the amount that they were receiving from the state law claim. So that's really okay. Oh, actually, so I didn't talk about the actual timing deadline, the statutes of limitations for the federal claim, right? Pursuant to 20 CFR section 725.308, a claim for federal black lung benefits must be filed within 3 years after a medical determination of total disability due to pneumoconiosis, which has been communicated to the minor or to a person responsible for the care of the minor, or within 3 years after the date of the enactment of the Black Lung Benefits Reform Act of 1977, which that's so long ago now, it's typically the first one, but that's the law, whichever is later, okay? There is no time limit. This can be important depending on your scenario. There is no time limit on the filing of a claim by the survivor of a minor. So that's kind of a good thing, I think. And that's it. That's really all I wanted to cover about, I think, black lung disability benefits in the Virginia Workers' Compensation Commission today. There's not a lot to cover. I think the statute of limitations is important, and just kind of getting an idea of maybe some differences between Virginia state law and federal law. I think that's helpful. But other than that, thanks for watching my video. For more information, check out our website. Check out our other YouTube channels. The website is www.hurtatworkinva.com. That's www.hurtatworkinva.com. It's chock full of information to help injured workers in a system that's, I think, has become kind of overly complicated, or more complicated than it started anyway. In addition, if you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you'll find informational videos, blog posts, whatever, that could be helpful depending on your circumstances. And so here's the thing. If you found this information to be helpful, or other information on our website or whatever, like, tell your friends, tell your family members, right? Because they could be going through something, or know someone else who's going through something that you don't even know about, right? So you wouldn't have any reason to tell that other person. So they could use the information. If you find it helpful, chances are someone else may find it helpful, right? And I'm trying to do my part in disseminating this information, because I feel like it shouldn't be kind of hidden, right? Because if it's hidden and no workers know about it, then how are they supposed to get all the benefits they're entitled to, right? So I'm trying to do my part. Help me out. Get the word out, right? Like, it's there's a lot of information on our website and in our YouTube videos. So some of it may be boring. I don't know, especially if it doesn't pertain to you. But you won't know if it pertains to you until you watch it, right? So or read it, whatever floats your boat. I feel like it's better to have the information and not need it than to need the information and not even know it's out there, not have it, right? Well, that's all I got. Until next time, stay safe and don't get hurt at work.